My name is Michael McSheehan. I hail from New Hampshire. My background is in speech pathology, and I've kind of evolved over the years to now be talking about kind of much bigger picture school change and district change work in the field of education. I work for and with the SWIFT Center, the School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation Center, SWIFT. We're not the trucks that you see driving around with SWIFT on them, but those are the letters. Our work presently is federally funded through the Office of Special Education Programs from the U.S. Department of Education. We have a 5-year technical assistance grant where we work with 5 states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maryland, Mississippi, and Oregon. We work with 16, 17 school districts and 64 schools across those states, and have been learning in our partnership with them some amazing things, some of which I'll share tomorrow in the keynote and definitely in tomorrow's equity-based inclusive education session. We're getting some really fun data now that we're 4 years into it, which is kind of cool. In our work, part of our charge is to try to look across all the silos of education to figure out how we cannot have the myriad of initiatives flying at people, but instead to bring some level of coherence to all the work of schools such that it can actually make sense in what we do. Also part of our charge was to look across traditional titles, traditional roles and responsibilities to say what might frameworks look like in schools if it was just an all hands on deck scenario and wasn't you take the special ed kids and you take the general ed kids, or the ones that we label that way, and you take the kids who are English language learners and you take the kids on alternate assessment. Instead of divvying out the kids by roles and titles, what if we got rid of that and talked about good education for all kids? What might happen? That's part of the work that we've been engaged in and part of what I'll reference today. Also, I want to acknowledge up front that a lot of the materials and thinking that's behind this session has been done in collaboration with a close colleague of mine, Dawn Miller, also at the SWIFT Center. We recruited her on board a couple of years ago, and she's just been a wonderful thinker to talk about these exact challenges and dilemmas with. So I'll thank her and give her credit up front. And a lot of the content, if you want some of the real detailed content that we're going to cover, we have a recorded webinar available on our website, swiftschools.org, that Don and I did on MTSS and special education. So I've already done that. I want to start off with us thinking about our collaboration styles, because this session has the potential to get pretty weedy, which for those of you who want to go jump into action and go get her done could feel a little frustrating. So I want to situate the work in what I call what is called the compass points collaboration styles. Have any of you ever used compass points in your work? Some of you are familiar with this. Awesome, great. So we're going to pretend that we have compass points on the walls in this room. We're going to pretend that that's north by those 2 glorious pictures back there. We're going to pretend that this is south, the screen up here, which would make this east. So this little ducket over here, and the windows over here would be west. And what I'm going to ask you to do in a short period of time is to get up and move to a compass point that resonates with you in terms of your collaboration style. Now, you're all evolved human beings, of course. You all have amazing collaboration styles, and you come at works from all different kinds of perspectives. And most of us tend to have a home base that we default to when we're collaborating with somebody else. I want to be also, another disclaimer here, you're not going to leave here with another diagnosis. Right? I'm not, you are north, severely north, like I'm not doing that. This is about kind of where you tend to default when you're collaborating with people. So I'm going to do a walk around the compass points, kind of chat out what those compass points might be showing as, and then I'm going to ask you to move to the one that seems to be closest to your home base. And if you're like between north, northeast, that's okay. If you situate yourself a little bit off to the side, that's fine. I'm going to encourage you not to stand just in the center. So the norths, down at this far wall, are our collaborators who want to jump into action. So you're going to move down here. If you're the person who, when you hear that big idea in your school, you want to jump into it, start doing it, and you'll figure out the details later. Like by doing it, you'll figure out the details. You're a let's get it done now kind of person. Right? Lists are fine as long as we're checking things off. A meeting is fine, as long as there are action steps and things to do and products at the end, right? We want to get it done, north, into action. Easts, over here, downside of norths, just to put it out there, might be the person who leads the school in a particular direction and then suddenly turns behind them to see a wake of bodies. Right? They've just kind of mowed over that notion of consensus to like get things into action. So there, every point brings a certain energy and maybe has some struggle points too. The Easts are really interested in the big principles that guide things. They want to know that we agree on the destination before we start taking off on the journey. Right? I'm planning the vacation and I'd actually like to know where we're going to go before we get on a plane. They might be interested in consensus around the big ideas, not because they want to bond with you as an individual personally, but that they want agreement that we're all at least in the same book, if not on the same chapter or on the same page. Right? So that kind of agreement, speculating, looking at that big picture, looking for agreement to the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish here. Why would we jump into action if it doesn't actually accomplish and align with our values, our principles, our desired outcomes? Okay? Wests, be over here by the windows. So, West is one of my blind spots. They have an eye to detail. Wests are known for being able to put something into a chart. Right? If you've got a lot of information and you need it charted, you want that West energy in your team. Wests are also known for asking a lot of the critical questions around who's going to do what, when, where, how. Once I know all of those roles and responsibilities, I'll be able to get into action. But unless I know you've got my back in this way and you're taking this part of the responsibility and you're going to be there to support this other piece, I'm not ready to jump into action yet. I agree with the big ideas, that's nice, but the devil's in the details, and I want to know those. So West can sometimes come off as a devil's advocate in a meeting because they're asking some really hard, focused, detailed level questions. Once they have those, they'll be able to get into action. Souths are focused on caring. They're concerned about the group's feeling and the individual's well-being. Right? They're that person who, after the meeting, are checking in with people. How are you doing after that meeting? How's this affecting you in your position within this building? I have a close friend, Linda Robar, who is a total South, and we'll joke back and forth that she thinks a good meeting is just a meeting where people came and we got to talk, right? She just loves to get together and talk about stuff. And that's great, but I have a little bit more North energy in me, and I want to get to what we're going to do about that. Souths are really good in the building and in collaboration teams to make sure that we're not leaving people behind. They're going to want to make sure that we're bringing people along in the conversations. Whether or not they agree on the big ideas, they still want the people to be brought along and taken care of in the process. Okay? Big on making sure everybody's voice is heard. Get the general gist of the 4 points? Go to your home base. Walk with purpose.
Can't be like
2 strengths that you bring as Norths. How odd.
we get stuff done. You know, we've identified what we want to get done, and we get it done. The other strength was positivity and willing to change.
Ooh. Nice. Okay. We'll do a strengths-based analysis all around the room first. Thank you. East, 2 strengths.
think a biggie is just that you have that vision, so you have a purpose behind anything that you're going to do, and you've explored all your options, so that when you determine which option is best, you can feel pretty confident in that.
Okay. Could you all hear her? Can you hear her? Okay, great. Yeah, those are two very frequently reported strengths of the East, right? We've really looked at a lot of options here, right? So when we land, we're landing. And we're driven by purpose, right? Cause is important to us. Our why. Why are we doing this is really, look at all the heads. You're like all in synchrony. That's great. Right, the why. Okay, great. Two strengths of the West?
We're very organized.
Very organized. Excellent.
And we are very purposeful because we think about all the details before we move into action.
Great. Purposeful and attention to detail, nice strengths. So we all need all of these. You are already getting that. Sounds, thank you. Two strengths?
Our first strength would be that when decisions have to be made, everyone feels like they may have a voice, so then there's more buy-in of the school or the teachers or the educators that get involved. And then our second strength, we just felt like that was just a stupid
I love it. I love it.
We kind of put those together, like everyone having a voice.
So there we go. Okay, so it's bringing people together and you're going to have a stronger consensus when you get there. Excellent. Great buy-in. Nice. Okay. Awesome strength. Strength we want on every single team with whom we're working, right? If we're designing a full system that's going to have any likelihood of sustainability in our schools, we'd like it to show up, and be around for more than 2 or 3 years as a passing initiative. We're going to increase likelihood if we're leveraging all of this in the conversation. Struggles that you bump into in your type, Norths.
We definitely identified possibly having to go back and fill some of those gaps that maybe we blew past.
Okay. Strategic way of wording that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Easts.
I think a lot of ours is just lack of action because you're thinking about all the options too much, so it takes a little bit more time to actually get started on something.
Okay. Okay, so startup time. Okay. Okay. Wests.
Sometimes getting hung up on the details too much.
Okay.
And also,
So kind of resonating with the East as far as slow to start, but maybe for different details that you're attending to.
we come across as type A sometimes, so it can be annoying.
Okay. We come across as type A. Okay. I don't know that that's annoying. But
So much on the details that, even though we do care, that gets put in the back seat. We have to focus on what needs to be.
okay. Hard to get to your why until you know that those other details are attended to. Okay. Okay. Sounds a struggle?
One of our struggles would be because we want to have input from everyone. It may muddy the waters a little because now we're getting lots of people's opinions, so we may lose our focus, but also it could make the time that we make a decision be really long.
Okay.
Hearing from everyone.
Interesting. So we're having timing factors come up for 3 of the groups for really different reasons, yet they could be complementary. Okay, that's really interesting. I like the way that you worded that. Thank you. Who's hard to work with? Norris, we'll start with you. Is there a point that kind of brings tension for you? I saw as you all were talking, several of your shoulders were going up. So,
We talked about a couple, but I think general consensus was some.
and any kind of unpacking? It's going to be okay. Bring it on. We're ready for you.
It's 20 minutes into this meeting, people. Come on, we got an hour. We're going to sit what's on the agenda. We got to make a decision. Let's move on.
It was sounding less than
That's more so what I usually hear when I do this activity. It's the let's get it going. Okay, great. Yeah, which people will default to the West for that, and yet, as you heard, it could come up in any of them. Great. Okay, thank you for naming your struggles there. Easts. Any North. In unison, they had high consensus on that. They agreed on that big picture. Why?
A little too fast for us.
A little too fast for you.
Slow down a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Hold on.
Okay.
Think about this first. Yep.
We don't get the big picture first.
a struggle.
Okay. If we don't have the big picture before we jump in, that's going to be a struggle for us with the Norths. West?
North.
Look at you all. The faces. That was great.
The agendas, and we stick to the agenda, so that when they said we don't know.
We're list makers.
Yeah, that's right.
And adhere to that agenda, right? There will be no flexing of this agenda. Okay.
I think there could be a little bit of the South, just because we are so detail-oriented trying to get to that destination that it's like, I understand you have feelings, but I really don't care about that right now.
Right. So there's, and this is actually something you resonate with the Norths on, and that is the task-focused, right? The task, as opposed to the people that are involved in that task, right? Excellent, great, thank you. Those are nice points. Sows?
We care about everyone. However, probably the North would be the one that would be the most difficult to work with because they want to jump right in, but we care about what everyone's opinion is, or like we want to get their input too. And when you jump right in, it's hard to gather input from others.
Yeah, and it can hurt. It can really hurt. Yeah, to feel like you're excluded from it. Yeah, right. We have a counterpoint from the Norths. Yes.
A good team has representation.
Yeah, so a good team has exactly that, Kathy, right? Representation from all these different perspectives. And you see your distribution here and the risk that we run in our work if we're not attending to people. So who's bringing that to your team if they're not there right now? Right? Absolutely. Kathy, you're dead on to that, right? So as we engage in the conversation in the next hour and 45 minutes that we have left, we're going to be thinking about what do these multiple perspectives bring, right? We can say MTSS and special ed, it's beyond that. There's also this dynamic at play in all of our buildings, right? Okay, come back to your seats. Thank you so much. Nice job. Nice job. Hopefully you get to meet a couple new people in that as well. If I say RTI, raise your hand if you think you know what that is. Okay. If I say PBIS, raise a hand if you think you know what that is. Okay, most of you in the room have some background in those two things. If I say MTSS, well, you came to the session, so at least read those words. But if you think you know what that is, okay, we lost a few people on that one. Okay, so I want to start with the East, the big picture of what you think MTSS is. Because that's really our entry point for any conversation about where is special ed in MTSS, is first kind of unpacking what do you think it is. So for those of you who were in my prior session, set aside the notes of things that I said in the last session and focus on what you think it is. Okay? So here's what I'd like you to do in your groups. And I'll invite people from the back to come join Mona at the front table. She's a really willing West collaborator. And Callie, so we have two West sitting all alone, waiting for some North energy. Come on down. What I'm going to have you do is at your tables and or small groups, let me see if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we'll have about 10 report outs. That will work. I want you to define what you think the pillars, the big buckets of MTSS are. Like if you had to say in an elevator speech, here's the big stuff that one would need to know in order to conceptualize MTSS. What would that be? So the big picture of MTSS is what? Think both in terms of its aim, its purpose, but also in terms of its components. And I actually want you to weight the components in this. Right? What are the kind of big pillars, the big buckets, core elements of MTSS? And then after we have those, and we're going to do 10 report outs, then we're going to move to comparing those and contrasting those with the way that we've currently framed it in the Swift Center, not for a right-wrong conversation, but just to get some jargon out of the way and some agreement on some core elements. So let's start there. So at your tables, work on question number 1. Come up with your elevator speech, your list, whatever format if you want to do it in a picture, that's fine. If you want to act it out for the group, I'm good with that. 5 minutes? Is 5 minutes enough for that? This is my north side speaking, so I can be coached into 10 if you think you need it. 5 is okay for number 1? 5 minutes for number 1. Okay. So we're going to have each group report out on what your big buckets are, what your key components are. You can please use the microphone so that they can hear you on the recording. That would be nifty. And we'll just pass this around. Who would like to start us off? Just raise your hands, jump right in. Excellent, thank you.
All right, we talked about the RTI process being the school-wide way of reaching struggling students and also trying new strategies both for academics as well as behavioral. In part of that, we need to have some data collection to ensure that there is some type of improvement or make some kind of action plan to make improvement. And then also the collaboration is key to that with the data to make sure that we're targeting the right places and we're using all of our amazing staff to the most potential. There is also the PBIS, which is the school-wide behavior plan, which is more of a blanket way of making sure that the behaviors of the students in general are positive and working well. That's it.
So the appropriate response is applause. And who would like to go next? And she'll run that right over to you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. We spoke, if you can picture a skin around the buckets that is fluid and creative and breathes, first of all. And some of those internal buckets would include beginning with the student need. The construct begins there instead of, well, this is your role, this is your role, this is your role. No, we're going to be driven, those roles will become and be driven by the student needs or collective student needs. Again, as this last group mentioned, that the behavioral and academic are not separate, one and the same. Not one and the same, but you know what I mean, they're embedded. Regular, timely progress monitoring, and to immediately stop what isn't working, to really determine if there's growth, and if not, to stop. Can't read my writing, I'll come back to that. Engaging high-quality Tier 1 instruction, and to use your existing resources. Oh, and then to always consider the class composite and the growth of all. Oh, thank you. Thank you. What? I gotta get this up. No one's making eye contact. Come on now. Oh, there we go. Everyone's like, go for it. Can you read Ms. Rose? Oh, you're handing it to me. No, I'm like handing it. Okay. No, thank you. I know, I was just teasing. We discussed a lot of the exact same things within our group. With the understanding all kids have different needs, combining all of our processes that are already going on within our building and implementing it into a system that is more a wide scope instead of different levels. so that everybody's needs are met. It needs to have some sort of system of identification or universal screening. Needs to, when we look at a model like this, we discussed that it would need to have some sort of structure of how you move within the system, with the understanding that all of the grouping within it is very fluid, and it really ties in a lot with your UDL systems within your building. And it also should be responsive and timely, and like they said, if it's not working and your data shows that it's not working, stop and come up with a new model or a new system. Okay.
Next group.
Well, I didn't write anything down, so I'll talk about what we spoke about. One of our biggest ones was doing benchmark data and having that for use. Another thing that we discussed was all of our buildings really don't implement RTI with fidelity, so we're not even at that level yet. And that RTI is always presented in this pyramid of services, and MTSS is more like a diamond-shaped continuum of services, and we need to change our scope of, it's not tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 kids, they're all in a continuum. For example, we might have a high ability child who needs social skills groups, which is typically considered SPED services. So we need to think about it more broadly and needs-based, which is what someone already mentioned. But I think that I hear a lot, our schools are doing a poor job implementing RTI, so we're not even at the point of even thinking about MTSS or PBIS, but that everything is focused upon behavior management and not those positive behaviors in a school culture, that we need to really focus upon that as well to get us to where we need to be.
Who would like to go next? Oh, Cassidy Walker. Excellent.
I think one of the foundations for our conversation was talking about it as a system or a framework for guiding conversations, that it's coherent and integrated, supporting the success of all students.
Basically, we touch base with all those factors. Primarily, that this is a systematic approach. We need to be focused on tier 1, making sure that the systematic academic supports, behavior supports, social emotional, social skills, all of those things are already well intact in tier 1 as reasoning for why we get so many referrals. Not only that, but it's a problem analysis. We're constantly identifying systematic problems and trying to figure out a solution for each of those problems. Not only that, but it's data driven. We also have to look at the assessments that we have to see what type of growth that they are getting with each of those interventions, if it's effective or not. So progress monitoring and then looking at the growth, and like so many have said, that we have to look and reevaluate to see if those interventions are effective or if they're not, and that it's geared towards all of our students, all of our staff. It's not the responsibility of just one person, which I've seen that it's kind of trying to point fingers to somebody else for the reason why that intervention backfired and so forth. So just trying to take accountability for all of our actions and kind of take the feeling out of it, and then just incorporating the executive functionings, your social emotional learning, behavioral deficits into a systematic operation.
So ours is pretty similar too, but we just kind of looked at the overarching emphasis on it being multi-tiered, and in that way it really allows you that flexibility to be able to support all students. I think a lot of times we get hung up, especially on RTI, at that tier 2 and tier 3, and so this offers just an additional framework to target other students who might be having additional needs. And a couple of the ideas that we threw around that were just important in this was just that we have that differentiated instruction for all students, and that's going to allow you to target other students who might have different needs other than the ones typically targeted through RTI, and then the universal benchmarks or screening or assessment, and really picking up those students early and being able to differentiate based on that throughout the tiers. Is there anybody left?
So we're from the east, so we're still planning. No, I don't need to go. No, I don't need to go through them. I think we had pretty much the same things to say. Universal screening approach, designing methodologies to reach all students, developing usable progress monitoring and data collection tools against that, using evidence-based practices in particular to support students. And the integration of supports for all students as opposed to students at just certain tier levels or IEPs or 504s. And then the larger systems approach, that the system needs to be in and of itself, a pillar of the system needs to be to identify the needs of all learners, exceptional learners, all learners.
It seems like we've got some common definitions here, which was part of this activity, was to look at those common elements and also to note where there are some differences. So as I share some of the language we have from the Swift Center, some of it might bump up against some of the language that you're using. I don't want us to get lost in the fact that we use tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 language, because our investments very much are about a continuum of support. We demarcate for specific conversations that we need to push with our technical assistants. So I think that might be the only touch point that could be a little off. I really appreciated hearing the emphasis on system, system, system. And nobody said it plural. You were all saying system, not systems. And that's just really awesome, right? Because it's a commitment to bringing all of that together, all of that aligned together, which many people are not there. They still have response to intervention for academics, and they have PBIS. And they're two separate systems. And they'll even have RTI for reading, which is different from RTI for math, which is different from RTI for other things to be determined. And what was a clear commitment, a very East agreement in this report out, was a unified system, which is exactly our vision at the center as well, to integrate not only across content areas, but to be thinking about integration across the various perceived silos. So I want to do a little compare and contrast around some of the language, some of the concepts, and make sure we're all on the same page, generally speaking. Then we're going to move into is unpacking some of the critical component areas and implications for special ed, general ed, particularly special ed, general ed conversations, but I'm going to dip into ELL, Title I, alternate assessment as well. So after this slide, you'll want access to the other two handouts. So if you don't have those queued up and ready to go, be working on that. So within the Swift Center, when we think about our multi-tiered system of support across academics, behavior, social, emotional well-being, we're thinking that there is, and it's consistent with what you all said, some universal dose of something that all kids get. All kids get this instruction around these priority behaviors. All kids get this core instruction around reading. All kids get this core instruction around math, and that's designed from the principles of universal design for learning, and it's informed using the data that we have on hand for differentiation with an agreed upon framework for differentiation. This is data informed, so we have universal screening. So as we talk about MTSS within our system, we might talk about assessments on whole, and there would be kind of 3 general bodies of assessments or data sources that are kind of common in the conversation. Some kind of universal screening data for academics and for behavior. We are in conversations about universal behavior screeners and actively promoting their use within our sites. Also with that comes historical data on individual kiddos, right? So if we're in a proactive model, I want to look at your history to predict your future. So if you're in 3rd grade and I've got 3 years of experience with you within my school or 4 years of experience with you in my school, I'm looking at that historical data as part of my screening endeavor, not just the standardized tool. So there's some kind of screening, assessment, and data conversation. There's a progress monitoring conversation, right? Checking to see what's working. We're also in a diagnostics assessment arena as well, which is that deeper dive to figure out what's preventing you from performing at the next level up. Right, so I'm not using diagnostics in a way of giving you a label, like you're not doing well in reading because you have this specific learning disability. You're not doing well in math because you have X disability. You're not doing well in this because you have autism. That's not the diagnostics. It's diagnostics to discover why you're not performing at the next level up in whatever the area is. So in reading, is it working with words? Is it phonics decoding that's getting in your way? Is that the kind of big thing that's preventing you from performing at the next level up? Does it have to do more so with language and background knowledge? I come from poverty. I've had really limited life experiences and exposure to multitudes of environments, and I'm not bringing that background knowledge with me to the table, and it's holding me back from performing at the next level up. So that deeper dive into what is preventing performance at the next level up would be diagnostics, and that is mostly happening up in this arena. We're not thinking that that's happening for all kids. You have your universal screeners to kind of do a triage there. So there's some conversations around assessments that are informing this. This is additional in our language, which it sounds like it's additional in your report outs as well. Any support beyond the universal is exactly that, beyond the universal, in addition to, not in place of. So if you're struggling in reading, we don't pull you out of the core reading to get you up to speed. We add on to that reading instruction. And that continuum of support may vary depending on individual need for closing a performance gap or raising a performance challenge. So consistent with what I heard in the report out, we're thinking about all students, not just students who are struggling, but it may be those who are accelerating. Those are who might be labeled in enrichment programs or gifted and talented, that this framework can be applied there as well. Your commitment to effectiveness conversations came out from a couple of the report outs. I was really pleased to hear that. Determining what's working and being willing to get rid of stuff that's not working, I think is the sign of true commitment to continuous improvement with MTSS. If you have an agreed upon framework for how you think about reading development in your building, and you have a framework that allows you to think about particular skills groups for adding on instruction. So there's a cognitive skills framework of reading that some colleagues of mine at the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies have used that leads them to 5 to 7 typical groupings for intervention and enrichment. And in the buildings that use that model, we have 7 big buckets of expertise that we try to develop, and we test out our instruction and our intervention in each of those buckets to see how they're doing. And if they're making the difference for kids and closing gaps and or raising the challenge, great. And if they're not, we get rid of them and we figure out what else has to go into that bucket. Now, in order to determine that, we need both student outcome data and we need fidelity data. Right? So if I have a group, so tier 1, I'm differentiating, I'm using my data to think about flexible groups across the year. These slides are adapted from work by Shannon Harkin in Iowa. If any of you have ever seen Shannon Harkin present, she's awesome. 5 minutes for break. Perfect timing. In tier 2, so this is built and prepared for one of the schools that we worked with that had this, the cognitive skills framework for the grouping for their reading interventions. And we would look at the groupings and we'd look at our data to figure out if kids needed to move to different groups, stay in the same group for a variety of reasons, not just for reading, but maybe for behavior and or for social emotional learning. But in order to determine who was going to move or who was making progress, we not only looked at individual student data, but at group data. So if we have individuals who maybe are showing they need less support, but one group where an entire group didn't make progress, we have to ask 2 questions. One, did we deliver what we intended to deliver in that group? Because we thought we were picking really good stuff to deliver in that group. So did we just not deliver it well? Or is it really not matched well to those individual kids' needs? Or is there something else at play here? So we have to be checking to see, are we actually delivering what we intended to deliver? So who's the coach for this group? What does the fidelity data show? Did we actually deliver the dose, the schedule, the intervention in the way that it was intended to be delivered? Is that why students in that whole group didn't make progress, or was there something else going on? It's making sense? I suddenly saw a bunch of people start to write, so if I'm into novel area, I just want to be careful there. So we've got the additive model, we've got the checks for what we're going to keep and what we're going to get rid of, we've got individual student matching, we've got universal design throughout, we've got the systems integration, we've got the fluidity, we've got the data. Okay. Here's the concept I want to leave you with before the break. And I want you to be, during the break, of course, enjoy your break. And you might want to think about this. What's the difference for MTSS and special education if we talk about a marriage versus some casual dating? And again, I want to thank my colleague Don Miller and Tilly for first putting this out there in 2014. And I've done some tweaking of it. So if we're thinking about special education and MTSS, special education and general education in a marriage, we're thinking about commitment to that big picture over to the east. They're all going in the same direction here. We're thinking about the mindset of a couple, right? So the couple is together against the world and the challenges out there, unified, side by side, arm in arm. Negotiations and decisions are made with everybody involved in mind, right? What's the impact on our family? Not just what's the impact on me. Casual dating might be commitment when convenient. Sure, we'd love to bring special ed into our work in MTSS because you have great resources. Mindset is 2 individuals. We have a general ed mindset, we have a special ed mindset. Maybe we have each different ways of thinking about MTSS. We navigate those when we go on dates. But we always know we get to go home afterwards. Decisions are made from individual standpoint first and foremost, versus from that family unit. We're as a couple. Where are you at in your districts? Are you married or are you casually dating across general ed and special ed right now? You do not have to disclose publicly. If you want to take your rings and hide them, that's fine too. But ponder that while you're on break. And it's what, a 10-minute break? It's a 15, live large, 15 whole minutes. Get up, move around, shake your butt. We'll pause the camera. We won't catch you as you're heading out. And we hope to see you back where we're going to unpack the marriage by Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, both from design implications and delivery implications. Just before the break, I posed the kind of framework of, are we married, are we casually dating? And you may be somewhere in between.
What if we're the wooing stage?
We're in the wooing stage. We're not even dating yet. We've seen each other on that app, but we have not decided to swipe left or right or anything. Okay. I'm actually not going to make you stand for this. If you think you're, so we're going to do three. I'm going to kind of do a poll to find out where you all are in your baseline. If you think you're casually dating or less,
we think we've been set up by parents.
that will be one question. If you think you're somewhere in the middle, that will be another question. If you really think you're on the marriage end of the continuum, or at least heading there pretty strongly, that will be the third prompt. How many of you are still in the casual dating in your systems? Okay. How many of you are somewhere in the middle? We're past the third date, there's no ring, but we're feeling good, okay. Marriage, like, we're talking proposals, we're looking at rings, or you've actually kind of taken the vows. Okay, we've got a couple of marriage. Okay, great. So my hope is for those who are married that I'll post some new question for you all to explore within your marriage and evolve to another place. What I've chosen to do next is I'm going to take, yes. So for those of you who feel like your systems are married, are you at a building level, district level? District? District. So K-12, married. She's like, yep. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take slices of tiers, and this is just for creating space for conversations that are bounded, right? Because otherwise we're talking about all of it and then we don't feel like we talked about any of it. So I want to do a slice on what we're going to call Tier 1, and I'm going to bring up some points around both the design components and the delivery, so leading it and actually delivering it. And then what I'm going to do is, after each segment, I'm going to break you back into your groups to kind of evaluate your systems. Where are we doing that? Where are we not? Is there anything from that list I would like on my action plan? And be thinking in terms of action plan. Right? When I leave here, I'd like to go back and have the following conversation with somebody. Okay? So I'm going to do a segment. We're going to break into groups. Then, depending on time, what I'd like to do is then introduce you to our practice profile and actually raise a different angle of design considerations from different populations that I think create another opportunity for special ed to have a role as an equal partner in the marriage. Okay? Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about Tier 1. Some things that we think might be givens in the design. We think that a given in the Tier 1 delivery system is that the core of our curriculum, our instructional sets, whether it be for academics, behavior, both, social and emotional well-being, has some research validation to that core curriculum. A way of achieving to our standards. How are we teaching to those standards? Proactive planning for learner variability as a given in the core. So we're designing our units, our lessons, with learner variability in mind from the get-go. multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. We have a commitment to explicit instruction within that core across those content areas. And we leverage universal screening for all kids in the system to at least trigger a data-informed, if not a data-based conversation. Which for many of you should be bringing up questions in your head, well, what about the kids who are not able to participate in our current universal screener? Right, so I'm particularly interested in kids who end up taking alternate assessments, and a lot of those kids can't take the universal screeners in the way that they're designed and validated. So what are we doing for that population? That becomes part of that conversation. And this is a struggle that I have when we get to our practice profile. It's a struggle that we're still having within the center about how we communicate things in the way that we measure them and how we communicate things in the way that they're actually designed in our schools. It's not a first then. It's a both and. Right? It's not a either we're going to work on reading or we're going to work on behavior. Particularly if we're thinking about planning for learner variability and we've got engagement at the heart of our conversation. If I go into a classroom where I'm seeing teacher-directed instruction and a bunch of worksheets and kids acting out, the way that I'm going to get to the behavior is by looking at engagement and quality instruction. So that quality instruction could be around any content area. So having a conversation about reading instruction versus behavior instruction really isn't the conversation. It's about what is good instruction. That's where we're going to start. The kid's not the behavior problem. It's the design that we've got to take a look at first and foremost. Right? So the belief in our multi-tiered system of support, consistent with PBIS and RTI for academics, is that your core is your foundation for everything else. If it's an additive model, but you're working off of a really sloppy core, a really weak foundation, then everything's falling down. Right? So good behavior instruction, good reading instruction, high quality engaging instruction is what we can add on to for kids who need additional supports. But the dilemma you've raised is really what's the foundation for that? Which does not start with, let me build my behavior foundation, then I'll work on my academic foundation. All that's in the same cement mixture, right? We've had this, because of the way things have been funded, policies have been written, we have this maybe idea that they're separate, and they're very much not. We know this as practitioners day in and day out. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk about curriculum, assessment, and instruction, or curriculum, instruction, assessment. I can't remember which is the order of the slide. So on the curriculum side, in Tier 1, we have opportunities for leading a fully integrated, braided, unified system. And I liked her language this morning, Dr. Wright's language around unified. I think that that's a great way to be thinking about this, particularly with a commitment to equity. So we have an opportunity to, at the leadership level, have clear and explicit expectation that all students are participating in and with the general ed curriculum. Whether that general ed curriculum is for academics or behavior, we're still talking general ed curriculum. We've got 35, 40 years of studies that show the way you have access to general ed curriculum is by being with the general ed curriculum. Right? Replicating that elsewhere for a special population does not have the same outcomes. So on the leadership level, how do we agree on and communicate those explicit expectations? We have a video and a kind of a phrasing that has played out with some of our partnerships from the Swift Center of all means all. And that's a great bumper sticker, right? All means all. All kids, all staff, all community, everybody's involved here. I also like to think about it in terms of each and every. My check on the all is to go through each and every kid in my class. Are all of these faces, all of these histories, all of these stories part of what I'm trying to lead and deliver here within our system? Selection of the curriculum. From a leadership perspective, we have an opportunity to involve general and specialized educators in the review, pilot, evaluation of curricular decisions. As somebody who gets often housed with special educators, it's frustrating to come to a district meeting or to a school level meeting and find out there's a new reading curriculum and there were no special ed staff members on the selection committee. That's a little frustrating because now you want me to get on board with and adapt and support this endeavor, and I wasn't part of the buy-in process. Right? So from a leadership perspective, we have an opportunity to make sure that we're involving multiple stakeholders in that. And our professional learning opportunities would be designed with the marriage in mind. Right? So the professional learning to support that would have the married audience that are attended jointly. Right? I was so pleased to see in my prior session such a high number of both general and specialized educators here. So how is that playing out in your districts? Do you currently have those braided, unified audiences, particularly when it comes, and I'm using a box here, around the Tier 1 research-based curricula. When folks are learning about that on the implementation side, what's happening. We have a partner district in Maryland that last year adopted both a new core reading program and a core math program in 1 year. We're like, okay, we will rally with you to make this successful. Gosh darn it. And fortunately, there were generalized and specialized educators who were involved in the choosing of these core curricula. They had engaged in pilot activities, 4 different programs, 4 reading, 4 math. Everybody was involved in giving input. However, the initial training that was provided did not invite special ed staff to the first training to roll out the core curricula. The person who was setting up the training, not the full district team, just the person who was setting up, managing the logistics, just didn't have it on their radar when they sent out the invite, so they only went to the general ed staff, which of course created a wonderful little wave of excitement in the district. So who's going to be involved in actually trying to carry out the core curricula, deliver it from UDL Principles? Whose voice do we need in that? We want them involved throughout from a leadership perspective. And then on the delivery part, we want those decisions that are based on grade level standards to have the attention to the individualized learning needs. So when we go to deliver, particularly if we're talking, even though we're talking Tier 1 here, we know we're individualizing, personalizing the learning even in Tier 1. So on the delivery side, what's that collaboration structure that's going to foster the conversation, it's going to house the conversation? We can, on the kind of loose side of it, we leave it up to individuals to work that out. If it's actually designed and in the pudding, in the mix, then what are the structures that will support those conversations that you want to have happen, that will force those conversations to have happen? And then how are you encouraging those and holding those conversations accountable? How are you making sure that those are happening? On the instruction part, we have leadership opportunities for collaborative planning. So again, on the leadership side, district teams, school leadership teams, setting up structures for the collaborative planning, which are agreed upon model for how collaborative planning happens. We know that shoving a bunch of different educators into a room together to say this is your collaboration time may not be enough support for certain personnel to be able to show up and fully engage. What are the questions you want them asking and answering in that collaboration planning? Provide the leadership around that. And the school staffing arrangements and the schedules would need to support that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, was it earlier in the last session or earlier in this session? One model is to have staffing arrangements and service delivery models that are driven by, informed by at least student data. So these may be flexible arrangements. One of the example I gave earlier was a school I'd worked with where they adjusted their school-wide schedules, not district-wide schedules, but school-wide schedules on a cycle of their data check-ins 3 times a year. Look at student data. What's the distribution of need? How does that inform how we're going to arrange ourselves as adults? That's a leadership level influence. Right? We're not leaving that up to on Monday you'll figure that out. Right? That's going to be the structure that's going to help you get there. On the delivery side then, how does the collaborative teaching structures, how do they flex enough to allow those general and specialized educators to come together around the focus questions, right? It may not be that co-teaching happens in every class in your building, right? So when I say collaborative teaching, I'm not only talking about co-teaching all the time in every class, which some of our schools that we've seen do really well actually do have that model. We've seen others do really well that don't have co-teaching staff in every single classroom. Michael Giangreco, how many of you are familiar with Michael Giangreco's work? He has historically done a lot of work on looking at paraprofessional utilization in schools, and has recently stepped from that to look more broadly at service delivery models, including how you arrange staff within collaborative delivery frameworks that match the FTE you would have given a certain student population. So he actually has a data-based approach. He took data from a number of schools in Vermont and used the data to generate models of how you could arrange your staff, which would include maybe collapsing down numbers of paraprofessionals to feed a special ed teacher position, redistribution of paraprofessionals as general ed assistants within the building, some really creative stuff, but data informed, and he came up with models for early elementary and into middle school. Last name is Giangreco. Giangreco. Just like it sounds. Giangreco, Greco. Michael Giangreco. And if you go to the Swift Schools website, the field guide, and search for Giangreco, we actually have his service delivery model article posted there that you can download for free. And on the delivery side, we want to be paying attention to differentiation of the lessons based on students' needs. And we've added this really important tagline there, and I'll go back to something I heard the Wests say over here, that sometimes our attention can be so much on the task that we're not paying attention to the people. We added the tagline here, with attention to membership, participation, and learning. So in looking at the differentiation, you're not just keeping in mind the task of achieving particular standards. You're also having attention for your differentiation to build a community of learners, to ensure that they feel welcome and belonging and have high membership in those communities. So that should be informing the differentiation. I'm not going to put in place differentiation that repeatedly separates a particular individual from my lessons. I want to be keeping the impact of that design in mind. So those are some considerations on the instruction side. In the prior session on this instructional note and general ed and special ed, I want to return to this point around specially designed instruction. And how many of you were in my prior session? Okay. We scared most of the rest of them away after this, but it's this notion that, in the law, this is how specially designed instruction is described. We've got to think about adapting content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. Says that in the law. We've got to address unique needs of children. Says that in the law. To ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. Says that in the law. This is the definition right from the law for SDI. Here is a standard definition of differentiated instruction. We're trying to address and respond to student needs by modifying content, process, and product. What we're teaching, how we're teaching it, how students are showing that they're learning that. What consistencies do you see across these two things, if any? Needs of the student show up in both. Great, check.
Access to the general education.
Access to the general education curriculum shows up in both. That's the intent on both. Great. What else? I think I just heard it. How we modify and adapt, right? So here we're modifying, the law uses adapt and modify, content, methodology, and delivery. Content, methodology, and delivery. Slightly different language here, same intent. We have an opportunity, if we're really going to build a unified system, to not message specially designed instruction as terribly different from differentiated instruction. This could open up numerous conversations in our systems. Imagine the power of going back with your general educators and having an agreed upon framework for what you're now calling specially designed instruction that is the turf and falls under the umbrella of special education. You actually could open that conversation up. And I actually think that this is on us as special educators to open up because it's been so defined as our turf and what we do. And it opens us up to learning lots of other ideas and stealing good ideas from our general ed partners in the instructional delivery side of it. Finally, on assessment, we have some leadership opportunities to ensure universal screening occurs for all students. So again, that includes looking at ways for universal screening for kids on alternate assessments. If our current universal screening design across academics and behavior, social, emotional well-being does not include some screening measure for our kids with the most significant disabilities, for our English language learners, any kids who are historically marginalized, we have an opportunity to come back to the table and have a conversation. Leading conversations about assessment means that we should have membership that's inclusive of multiple roles in the system at all levels, right? So just on that conversation about selecting curricula, if we're selecting universal screeners, general and special educators should both be in the piloting process and the final selection process. Particularly if the purpose of those screening tools is to promote school-wide planning around common data. We want to make sure that that data is going to work for all of our children in order to determine who may need what kinds of different supports. And I've already made that point. What I want you to do now at your tables is going back through curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Make two determinations. One, where is my system at relative to those opportunities for leadership and for the delivery? Where are we at? Do a status. And then at your tables, discuss what are possible ways to bump it up to the next level. Out of those possible opportunities, and you may have other opportunities in mind around Tier 1. Right now we're focused just on Tier 1. What opportunities are there for unifying general and special education within an MTSS framework? So again, you can use the ones that are on the list or you can generate additional ones. So first, status assessment. Then, what are some possible things that I would work on? So think action plan. Understand the directions? Give me a thumbs up. If not, give me a thumbs down, just so I know who to check in with. Good, okay. Okay. 5 minutes? 10 minutes? What do you think you need? 5? 5 minutes. What did you find in your group discussions? Let's first take your status reports. Are many of those things happening in your districts, in your schools? What was the general finding at your tables? Yes? Yes, over here. Others? So you're seeing it differ by content area. Can you tell me more? So let me push back on that language a little bit, right? So I like to think in terms of rubrics, and like we've got a little something here, we've got more of it, we're right where we want to be, right? So in a strengths-based approach, I always like to look for, so what is it you do have that can be built on? Were you able from the list to find anything that's like, they've heard that word before, I could build on that?
Yeah, I mean, there has been some opportunities of like co-teaching in the classrooms, and you kind of hit the front of some of the teachers who are a little concerned about that, or kind of hit bump heads with, that aren't willing to kind of try that. But there has been some opportunities. I know of in my school specifically that of co-teaching and working through the curriculum or bouncing ideas off each other. But that only goes so far, and I still think about a big school.
So individuals are welcome to date in a co-teaching relationship, but the school or district is not committed to a marriage of co-teaching. Okay, great. Great. So then there's an opportunity to kind of look at those experiences to say, well, what's working about those? What's the benefit to students? Is something really different happening for our students in those groups? And like, can we leverage that data somehow? Okay, so we've got some mix over here. Other tables, where are you at with the indicators? Back rows? When you did your status check, they're happening, they're not happening, they're... the face! None of them? So when you say kind of the nothing happening, is there an assumption that you are implementing MTSS in the building? So it's a bigger leadership gap. Okay, all right. Which actually presents a perfect opportunity for you. So sometimes, thank you very much, sometimes it's actually easier to have these conversations if you're building from scratch than if people are kind of, if they have a habit. I'm imagining the Oregon trails and the ruts that get built from people driving over the same spots in the dirt road, right? If you don't have those, it's actually sometimes easier to build than to try to get people out of those gullies for their wheels. But I do want to think about what are the entry points then for those conversations. So what would be the entry point for those conversations? So I want to move over to the action part, but it looked like somebody else's hand went up around the status. Yes? I'm going to throw out a couple of things that we've done with our schools that match actually all three of those dilemmas that have just been shared. They come from both East and West mindsets. So think about these both as big picture and maybe attention to detail as a way to spark conversations that may be otherwise hard to spark. So I'm going to refer to the other two handouts that you have for this session as a way to get into this. And this is actually a activity that I strongly recommend all schools do, all systems do. The first document I want to refer to is this one, which is called a Sample MTSS Practice Profile. And it says sample very strategically here, because we're not saying this is the practice profile that people should use for MTSS. There are actually several flaws that I see in this example. But let me talk to you about how we're using it. We put together what kind of the starting point. So when we opened the activity for this session, I asked you all to identify your core components, your essential ingredients, your big buckets for MTSS. So what we did is we went through and we said, what are our big buckets? How are we talking about MTSS? And the largest buckets are found in the left-hand column of the practice profile. So we have a big bucket around collaborative teams and database decision-making. We have a big bucket around Tier 1. We have a big bucket around, it's a really big bucket for Tier 1, big bucket for Tier 2, and a big bucket for Tier 3. And there's a bucket around screening and progress monitoring. One could argue that you want to take your screening, progress monitoring, all assessments and put those into one bucket. You could do that. It'd be absolutely fine. You could take and put that and make that the data bucket and have collaborative teams be separate. These are arbitrary. What's more important there is that we said we don't have a way of having a conversation about MTSS because we're talking past each other. Let's identify some buckets for the conversation so we can get into the details but know how they're related. So the opportunity, I think, for schools and districts that we provide with this is to say, here's a sample of how one might start to frame a conversation about MTSS. What would happen if we all had some similar language around MTSS in our system? So we start with the big buckets, and then we identify the specific essential components within each of those. And because of the way we have to measure some things within our grant, there's some funkiness in this language. So I just want to put a disclaimer here, because if I were writing this with a school district, I would do it differently. So we then looked at essential components, grade level and specialized educators working in teams to monitor student progress and plan academic instruction and intervention strategies across levels of need. So if I were working with a school district, I would say academic and behavior. Right? And because of some measurement stuff we had to do, we had to break out behavior from academics, because the tool had to serve us. So a school has to look at what's it serving for you. So what's your common big organizing forces? Very east in terms of MTSS. So I give this to districts and start a conversation about what would your left column be? Right? So very similar to the activity that you did, but we do it until we've landed on agreed upon buckets, the big picture of MTSS. What are our big ones? And then within those big buckets, what are the essential components? So it's very east. It then moves way west. West like you can't go any more west. Where we say, what does that look like when we're doing it? Who's doing what, when, where, how? And how do we know? So now we're breaking it into this kind of, you're starting, you're developing, or here's our gold standard. Here's what it would look like fully in place, and we agree upon this. So it's very much the east-west walking, that some of you were struggling with where do I place myself, because you can see yourselves doing both. If your intent is to build consensus, right? You're going back and forth from these big pictures to your details and back. So we'll give this to districts, and then facilitate a series of conversations. Start with your left column. How are you talking about MTSS? If right now it's RTI-A and RTI-B, how could we bring those together? What are the common buckets across both of those? Then moving into essential components, and then into your rubric. And I'll actually use different language than this with districts, where I'll say, and sometimes it's easier to start over here. Depends on the group, actually. If I've got a lot of devil's advocates in my room, sometimes it's easier to start over here, but rarely in the middle. It's usually, what's your gold standard? Ideally, if this were like everything was well-resourced and just everybody knew everything they needed to know, what would it look like? Gold standard. And then we go over to say, what's unacceptable? Right, so it's a gold standard, what's acceptable variation from that gold standard, and what's just not acceptable. You don't want this. Which would mean if anybody scored in this column, they would get wraparound support to at least get into the next column quickly. So the West details get you into specific conversations about co-teaching and where that fits. And now you get to actually draw on specific examples that you have of it to see, is that something that we would actually put in the profile for the whole system? And if it's not co-teaching specifically, is it a broader collaborative teaching approach that has some nuances to it? And can we articulate what those are? This can be done at the district level. This can be done at the building level. I encourage it to be done at the district level, but it depends on the districts. It depends on the schools and those relationships. We actually just had a district make their own full MTSS practice profile. And it was exciting for the first 2 meetings, and then it became painful. And there was crying, and there was energy, shall we say, about turf that came up. And then once we got through that part to the other side, and we had multiple stakeholders from across the district all on the same page, it was amazing how quickly things went from there. Once they understood each other's perspectives and articulated it on paper, they then brought it out to their buildings and they said, we now want to get building level input. So this was a district level initiative to start a conversation. But they said, we're not saying now go do this. We're saying now talk with us about this thing that we think we've articulated. They went out to buildings, they got building level, multi-stakeholder teams at each building to give input, brought back the feedback to the district team, and sure enough, school buildings thought of some things that the district team hadn't thought about. So it was this constant east-west, back and forth. Now, all of our Norths, we kept well medicated during this time. We reminded them of all the good work that still has to happen on Monday where we're all deciding about this. And we enrolled our Souths to make sure that communication loops were happening and that people were in the conversation and people knew when to expect what kind of decisions. All of that was, the first messaging, however, was we're not changing practice next Monday. We're having a conversation about what it is we all actually think MTSS is, and we're trying to build agreement on that. So far, so good? Okay. Can you imagine yourself doing this? You're going to lead it when you go back. You will. So that's one inroad to get to the three dilemmas that were just posed. Here's a different inroad. Go to the other MTSS practice profile I gave in the handouts. This was made for the districts and schools who feel like they are already doing it. They needed more focused reflection questions. We found that they didn't want to have we don't want to rehash what we think we mean by. We want a way to check our system. So in that case, I made this considerations for students who column. So for any essential component, how are we considering all of our subpopulations? Kids on alternate assessment, English language learners, kids from poverty, kids from different racial ethnic groups. Depending on what the makeup is of your population, that becomes really relevant. Some of my New Hampshire schools, that part's not the conversation that we're having. So anywhere that there's a blank, you can fill in your own subgroup. So the core curriculum allows for participation in learning by students with IEPs, from poverty, who are English language learners, within the same physical environments as other students. Does the core curriculum allow for that? That would be an essential component consideration. So for the sites where you think we already know and we already agree on, this can be a conversation point for, once you ask this prompt, then you can go out and you say, well, what are everybody's roles around helping that to happen? What can special educators contribute to that conversation? What do our families contribute to that conversation? What do our general educators contribute to that conversation? Right? Then we can pull our Souths in to help us think about getting everybody involved in the conversation. So this is much more than just special ed and MTSS, right? This is about finding all of our stakeholders in MTSS. So if you're in a district or school that thinks they know what MTSS is, this might be the entry point for those conversations. Take a moment. Let me see, I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. Toggle between the two profiles and the two strategies I just shared. And then I want to take any questions on those two strategies. Now that you've had a chance to kind of reflect on the strategies for each of those, take a piece of paper, a sticky, whatever works for you. 3 columns. What I could do when I leave here. Who I would enroll to help me with that thing that I want to get done. And by when will I make my first step toward that? Not complete it, first step toward it. When you think about your who to enroll with you, be thinking about collaboration styles as well. Who will complement maybe your default collaboration style? So I worked with a special ed director once who was a true West, and I'm a North-Northeast. And as her consultant, I was not helping her by constantly jumping into action on things. But when I went to her with charts and laid out roles and responsibilities, she would do anything, as long as she had it in that format. So as you make your list, keep those collaboration styles in mind. What am I going to do? Who do I need to enroll? by when will I take my first step? If you come up with 3, that'd be great. If you come up with 5, that'd be fine. Okay, many of you have your lists well underway. I want to use the last 15 minutes for open group Q&A, group problem solving. So, no, that's fine. I'm going to use the last 15 minutes of our session for open Q&A, and then possibly large group brainstorming if we need to go there. So I want you to take a minute in your groups or individually if there's any lingering question about any content that we've covered or any implications of what we've covered. I'll do an open Q&A around those things. So take a moment, gather your thoughts. You'll note that I did not go through all the slides. I went through one section of the slides because the next 2 sections repeat themselves. So I'm teaching you one and walking you through it. The other 2, it's wash, rinse, repeat. So you can do those same activities on your own. There was no need for me to lead you through that. You can read those. So take a minute, see if you have any questions for me around the content or implications, and then we'll open it for conversation. Take a minute. So there's been a lot of north, south, east, and west work. At the end of the day, some things that are going to make this marriage work, right? Shared commitment, shared understanding, which sometimes means we're going east, we're going west, and back and forth. Right? It's like, well, I thought we had commitment to this thing, but we had a different understanding of what we had committed to. Shared language and shared decision making. Think about how you can go back and move your long-term relationships forward. And enjoy the rest of the conference. I'll see you all again tomorrow morning, bright and early. Have a great night.